The courtroom was designed to feel serious. Every detail, from the polished wooden benches to the heavy seal of the state mounted behind the judge's chair, served as a reminder that this was a place where emotions were supposed to stay quiet and controlled. Justice, people believed, worked best when it was orderly and restrained. On this particular morning, everything appeared to be exactly that. Sunlight filtered through tall, narrow windows, cutting pale rectangles across the floor. Dust floated lazily in the beams, unnoticed by most. Lawyers shuffled their papers with practiced efficiency. One adjusted his tie. Another whispered instructions to a client whose leg bounced nervously beneath the table. A court clerk typed steadily, fingers moving without hesitation. The room hummed with routine. Near the front, beside a uniformed police officer, sat a large German shepherd. The dog's back was straight, paws aligned, head forward. His vest read K9 unit in bold letters. He had been trained for years to remain still in chaotic environments, sirens, shouting crowds, flashing lights. A courtroom was easy by comparison. To most people present, he was simply part of the scenery, another tool of law enforcement, no more remarkable than a badge or a holstered weapon. The judge entered and everyone rose. She took her seat with calm authority, her expression neutral but attentive. She had presided over thousands of cases in her career. Assaults, thefts, custody disputes, crimes fueled by anger, desperation, or addiction. She prided herself on fairness and discipline. Emotions were acknowledged, yes, but they did not dictate rulings, or at least they weren't supposed to. The case before her that morning involved a domestic incident. The details were grim but, sadly, familiar. Police reports were stacked neatly on the bench. Testimony would be heard. Facts would be weighed. A decision would be made. Another case would join the long list of concluded trials. In the back row, almost hidden behind adults twice his size, sat a 3-year-old boy. He was small even for his age, with dark hair cut unevenly, as though someone had trimmed it in a hurry. His sneakers didn't quite touch the floor when he sat. He clutched the sleeve of the woman beside him, his aunt, so tightly that her jacket had begun to wrinkle under his grip. She had tried gently to free herself, worried he might tear the fabric, but the child refused to let go. The boy had not spoken since they entered the building. His aunt had noticed it immediately. Usually he asked questions nonstop. Why were the doors so big? Why did people whisper? Why couldn't he run? That morning there were no questions, only silence. His shoulders were drawn inward as if he were trying to make himself smaller. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, tracking nothing, seeing less. To the court, he was listed simply as minor present. No one had asked why a child so young needed to be there. Children appeared in courtrooms more often than people realized, sometimes as witnesses, sometimes as part of custody cases, sometimes because there was simply nowhere else for them to go. This was not unusual enough to cause concern. The trial began. The prosecutor spoke first, voice steady, confident. She outlined the charges, describing events in clear, detached language, dates, times, locations. The defense attorney followed, objecting here and there, doing his job. The judge listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. The police officer with the K9 remained standing at attention. The dog did not move a muscle. Minutes passed, then more. The child's aunt shifted in her seat, trying to ease the stiffness in her back without disturbing the boy. She glanced down at him, worried. His knuckles were white from gripping her sleeve. His breathing was shallow and uneven. She leaned close and whispered, "It's okay, we'll be done soon." The boy did not respond. Across the room, the police dog's nose twitched once, almost imperceptibly. The handler felt it through the leash, a faint vibration, nothing more. He dismissed it. Dogs picked up scents constantly. Old wood, paper, stress, fear. Courtrooms were full of it. The judge called the first witness. As the witness took the stand, the room settled again into rhythm. Questions, answers, objections, rulings. The sound of the clerk's keyboard filled the pauses. Everything moved forward as expected. Then quietly something changed. The boy lifted his head. At first it seemed insignificant. Children shifted all the time, but this movement was slow, deliberate, as though it required effort. His eyes, which had avoided everything around him, rose and focused straight ahead. They landed on the police dog. For a long moment the boy simply stared. His grip on his aunt's sleeve loosened slightly. His breathing deepened. His eyes widened not in fear but in something else, something harder to name. Recognition. The dog's ears flicked backward, then forward again. The handler felt the leash tighten just a fraction. He frowned, glancing down. The dog was still seated, still obedient, but alert in a way that was different from professional readiness. This was personal. The boy leaned forward in his seat as though drawn by an invisible thread. His mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. The courtroom continued, oblivious. The witness spoke about that night, about raised voices, about police sirens, about a door forced open. Words filled the air, describing chaos and danger, but the boy's attention never left the dog. Each sentence seemed to pull something from deep inside him. The dog inhaled slowly, deeply. The scent hit him all at once, not just the smell of a child but layers beneath it. Fear, dust, old carpet, a closet, a night filled with shouting and broken glass. The memory was not visual but emotional. Dogs remembered feelings more than images. His tail remained still, his posture remained correct, but his heart rate changed. The handler noticed now. He shifted his weight, concerned. The dog had worked countless cases. He had sat through trials before. This had never happened. In the back row, the boy's aunt felt his body relax against her arm. She looked down, surprised. For the first time that day, he did not seem tense. He seemed focused. She followed his gaze and saw the dog. Understanding flickered across her face, followed quickly by disbelief. "No," she whispered to herself, "it can't be." The boy's lips moved again. This time, a sound escaped, so soft it was nearly lost beneath the voice of the attorney. The dog's head turned slightly. Not enough to break form, just enough. The judge noticed the movement out of the corner of her eye. She paused, mid-sentence, watching the back of the room. Years on the bench had taught her to recognize disruption before it became obvious. Something was wrong, or different. Her gaze landed on the child. Then on the dog. The courtroom, still wrapped in routine and rules, had no idea it was seconds away from stopping completely. And no one yet understood that the smallest person in the room was about to change everything. The sound that left the boy's mouth was barely louder than a breath, yet it cut through the courtroom more sharply than any gavel strike. It wasn't a word, not exactly. It was a soft, broken syllable, half-formed, trembling, as if it had traveled a long way before reaching the air. His aunt felt it more than she heard it. The vibration passed through her sleeve, through the small hand that still rested there, no longer clenched in fear but holding on gently now as though reassured. The dog heard it clearly. His head turned a little more this time, just enough that the handler could no longer ignore it. A trained canine was taught to focus on threats, commands, and cues from his handler, not on random sounds from the gallery. Yet the dog's eyes were no longer forward. They were fixed on the child. The handler swallowed and subtly tightened his grip on the leash. "Easy," he murmured under his breath, barely moving his lips. The dog did not move closer. He did not stand. He did not bark, but something in his expression changed. His ears relaxed. His jaw loosened slightly. It was the look he wore on quiet nights after long shifts when his vest was off and his guard lowered. The look of an animal that felt safe enough to feel. The witness on the stand continued speaking, unaware that attention in the room was beginning to fracture. Words about police procedure and timelines flowed on, but they seemed distant now, like noise from another room. The boy leaned forward again, this time slipping his small hand free from his aunt's sleeve. She started to pull him back instinctively, panic flashing through her chest. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "Sit, sweetheart." He didn't look at her. His eyes never left the dog. The boy's feet slid off the bench, soles touching the floor. The movement was quiet but not silent. A woman 2 rows ahead turned, frowning slightly. A man glanced over his shoulder, irritation crossing his face. Courtrooms were not places for disruption. The judge looked up. Her gaze sharpened immediately, scanning the room until she found the source. She saw the small child standing unsteadily near the bench, one hand hovering in the air as if reaching for something unseen. She opened her mouth to speak. Before she could, the boy took a step forward. A soft gasp rippled through the courtroom. The aunt reached out, her hand brushing the back of his shirt, torn between stopping him and fearing what might happen if she startled him. Her heart pounded. Children were unpredictable. Police dogs were trained, but trained for protection, for control, for force if necessary. The handler's muscles tensed. Every instinct told him to intervene. But the dog sat perfectly still. He did not bare his teeth. He did not stiffen. He did not show warning signs. Instead, his body angled ever so slightly toward the child, forming a subtle barrier between the boy and the rest of the room. It was a protective posture, not an aggressive one. The handler had seen it once before. Only once. Months ago. The memory hit him hard. A call in the middle of the night. Domestic disturbance. Screaming reported by neighbors. He and the dog had arrived with lights flashing, adrenaline high. Inside the apartment, chaos, broken furniture, overturned chairs, voices raised in panic. The dog had been sent in first, trained to clear rooms to detect threats. Instead of an armed suspect, he had found a child. A tiny figure curled into the back corner of a closet, hands over his ears, shaking silently. The dog had stopped immediately, instincts overriding commands. He had sat down in front of the child, blocking the doorway, refusing to move until the handler arrived. The handler's chest tightened as the memory surfaced. He looked back at the boy in the courtroom. Same dark hair, same eyes. Older, yes, but unmistakable. Oh my God, he thought, it's him. The boy took another step forward, wobbling slightly. His balance wasn't perfect, but his determination was. He raised his hand fully now, pointing directly at the dog. "Safe," he said. This time the word was clear. The sound echoed, unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. The witness stopped speaking. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. The defense attorney turned fully around. The clerk's fingers hovered above the keyboard, unmoving. The judge raised her hand sharply. "That's enough," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Hold all testimony." No one argued. The dog exhaled slowly, a deep, controlled breath. His tail remained still, but his body relaxed further. He lowered his head slightly, eyes never leaving the boy. The handler knelt instinctively, bringing himself closer to the dog's level, keeping the leash loose but ready. "It's okay," he whispered, not to the dog but to the child. The boy's face crumpled for just a second, emotion flashing across it too fast to name. Fear, relief, memory. Then he took one more step and stopped as if an invisible line had been reached. He did not cross it. Instead, he stood there, small and fragile in the middle of a room built for adults and authority, and looked at the dog like he was looking at an old friend. The judge watched closely, her heart tugging in a way she had not expected. She had seen children cry in her courtroom. She had seen them scream, resist, shut down completely. But this was different. This child, she thought, isn't acting out. He was remembering. She leaned forward slightly. "Ma'am," she said gently, addressing the aunt, "is this your nephew?" "Yes," the aunt replied, her voice shaking. He doesn't usually. He hasn't talked much since the incident." "What incident?" the judge asked. Before the aunt could answer, the handler spoke up, his voice tight. "Your Honor," he said, standing carefully, "with the court's permission, I believe my K9 has encountered this child before." A murmur swept through the room. The judge's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in focus. "Explain," she said. The handler took a breath, steadying himself. "Several months ago, my partner and I responded to a domestic call. We located a young child hiding in a closet. My dog remained with him until paramedics arrived." He looked down at the boy, who was now sitting on the floor without realizing it, legs crossed, eyes still locked on the dog. "I believe this is that same child." The silence that followed was heavy. The judge felt something shift inside her, something deeper than procedure, deeper than case law. She looked at the child again, really looked at him this time. Not as a disruption, not as a minor present, but as a witness whose testimony did not come in words. She raised her gavel, then hesitated. For the first time that morning, she did not bring it down. Instead, she spoke softly. "We are going to take a short recess," she said. "No one leaves, and no one interferes with what is happening here." Her eyes moved to the child and the dog. "Some moments," she added, "are bigger than the schedule." And in that pause between law and humanity, between memory and safety, the courtroom held its breath, unaware that justice itself was about to be redefined. The moment the judge ordered a recess, the courtroom transformed. The buzz of typing and whispered legal strategy faded into a quiet so heavy it almost felt like it had weight. Everyone, lawyers, clerks, jurors, spectators, paused, unsure of what was appropriate. They had been trained to follow procedure, to watch, to listen, to remain impartial. Yet here the usual rules seemed insufficient. Something extraordinary was happening, and it demanded attention. The boy remained frozen on the floor, his small frame tense but resolute. He had stopped moving forward but had not blinked, not once, since his eyes had locked on the dog. The handler knelt lower to his K9 partner, keeping one hand on the leash but loosening it to give the dog a sense of freedom. He knew instinctively that the dog had recognized the child from the previous incident. It was a memory the animal carried in a way humans could hardly comprehend, through scent, tone, and feeling, etched into its very being. The dog, still seated, lowered his head slightly and inhaled slowly. His dark eyes remained fixed on the boy. He was a professional trained to ignore distractions, yet something about this child was different. It wasn't just familiarity. It was something deeper, pure recognition, relief, and a shared memory of fear and safety. The aunt crouched beside the boy, hands hovering but careful not to intrude. "Sweetheart, it's okay," she whispered. Her voice shook slightly, betraying her own disbelief. "It's just a dog." But even she felt the weight of the moment. She had been there during the police intervention months ago, but she had never seen the boy react this way. Not like this. The boy finally spoke again, his voice tiny but steady. "Safe." The word hung in the air. Every adult in the room stopped moving. The judge leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. Her eyes widened slightly, and she motioned for silence, letting the word echo in the room. The K9's ears twitched in response. He leaned forward slightly, maintaining a perfect seated posture, yet his body language radiated calm attentiveness. The handler's heart raced. He had never seen his partner respond to anyone like this in a courtroom. The dog's training dictated vigilance, control, and obedience, but the bond between the animal and the child transcended command. It was instinct, compassion, memory. Across the room, the prosecutor, usually stoic and unshakable, whispered to her assistant, Is that the same child?" Her voice trembled, betraying her usual composure. The defense attorney glanced over his papers but quickly realized words were unnecessary. Everyone present understood, on some level, that this was no ordinary courtroom moment. The judge finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. Let the record reflect that the trial has been temporarily paused due to unforeseen circumstances. I will allow the professionals in this room to address the situation with discretion." She looked directly at the child. "Young man, you are safe here. No one will hurt you." The boy flinched slightly at the words but did not look away from the dog. He slowly inched forward, closer to the K9, as if drawn by a magnet. The dog's posture did not change, but his gaze softened. A gentle warmth radiated from the animal, a kind of reassurance that spoke louder than any command. The handler crouched fully to the ground, placing a hand lightly on the dog's back. "Go ahead," he murmured. "It's okay." The boy stretched out a trembling hand. His small fingers hovered a few inches from the dog's snout. The German Shepherd lowered his head a little more, letting the hand brush against his fur. The contact was electric in its simplicity. The courtroom collectively held its breath. No one moved. Everyone understood they were witnessing something rare, an unspoken connection bridging months, trauma, and fear, sealed by loyalty and instinct. Tears welled in the aunt's eyes as she watched. She had known the police dog had been there the night of the incident, but she had never imagined the child would remember. More than remember, he had recognized the dog as a symbol of safety. His tiny mind, though still processing the world, understood that the presence of this dog meant he was protected. The child's body relaxed fractionally. His fingers traced the dog's fur with a tentative curiosity. The German Shepherd remained motionless, yet his presence was undeniably comforting. He exhaled slowly, a controlled breath, but it carried the subtle release of tension. To the dog, the child was no longer a frightened, cowering figure. He was someone to watch over, someone whose fear the animal could alleviate. The judge observed all of this silently. Years of experience had taught her to recognize patterns, to assess behavior, to evaluate credibility. But here, she found herself humbled. She had seen trauma in the courtroom before, but never so clearly articulated by a child without words, and she had never seen a dog communicate so effectively without speech. She made a mental note to allow this moment to unfold naturally, understanding that the courtroom, usually bound by rigid rules, needed no protocol to define compassion. The prosecutor cleared her throat, breaking the spell for a moment. "Your Honor," she said softly, this is highly unusual, but perhaps it's evidence of the child's prior experience with law enforcement." The defense attorney nodded, equally quiet. "It's clear that the child recognizes the K9 officer. This could be important for understanding his state of mind, his trauma, and perhaps his safety." The judge raised her hand for silence again. "No arguments right now. We are observing, not judging. Let the child and the K9 interact without interruption. It's a matter of safety, yes, but also of humanity." The boy finally allowed himself to sit on the floor fully, cross-legged, letting the dog approach just a few feet. His breathing evened out. The German Shepherd lowered his chest slightly, sitting back on his haunches in a relaxed pose while maintaining eye contact. It was then that the handler noticed something remarkable. The dog was not simply calm, he was communicating. Every inch of his posture said, "I remember you. You are safe. You are not alone." The child's gaze softened in return. A faint smile curved the corners of his lips. He reached out once more, lightly brushing the dog's snout with both hands. The German Shepherd leaned in gently, not moving, not reacting, allowing the contact. A profound stillness settled over the courtroom. Adults who had arrived expecting a standard legal procedure found themselves captivated by this display. Lawyers, clerks, and officers alike recognized that the boundaries of their world, the boundaries of law, protocol, and formality, were being reshaped by a quiet, mutual understanding between child and dog. The aunt leaned closer, whispering reassurance. "It's okay. He's your friend. You're safe." The boy nodded slightly, his tension easing for the first time in months. The courtroom, usually full of rigid order, had become a space for something deeper. Silence had replaced argument. Compassion had replaced procedure. And in that shared moment, every adult present realized that justice sometimes was more than law, it was care, recognition, and protection. The judge finally spoke, her voice gentle but commanding. Let this moment continue and let no one interfere. Sometimes the smallest among us teach the greatest lessons. Outside the courtroom, sunlight continued to stream through the windows, but inside, time had slowed. The child and the K-9 sat quietly together, forming a bond that no courtroom procedure could define. And everyone watching, every adult trained to measure, to judge, to calculate, felt the weight of the lesson. Safety, recognition, and empathy could be as powerful as any verdict, any sentence, any law. For the first time that morning, the boy smiled fully, a small, hesitant expression that carried months of fear, uncertainty, and mistrust away with it. The dog remained poised and calm, a living reminder of loyalty and protection. The courtroom had stopped in its tracks, and in doing so, it had witnessed something extraordinary. A connection forged not through words or law, but through memory, instinct, and trust. And in that quiet, still, profound moment, the boy realized he was no longer alone. The judge leaned back slightly in her chair, letting her eyes travel slowly across the courtroom. She had seen a lot in her years on the bench, but nothing like this. A 3-year-old child standing, then sitting, completely absorbed by a German Shepherd police dog, while the rest of the room remained frozen in disbelief, was unprecedented. She had always believed the courtroom was a place for rules, order, and procedure, where emotions could be acknowledged but not allowed to dictate outcomes. Today, however, it became clear that rules alone could not contain what was unfolding. "Let's pause," the judge said, her voice cutting gently through the silence. "All proceedings are suspended for now." Her gavel hovered above the bench, though she did not bring it down. The room had already stopped, as if every person present was holding their breath. Lawyers straightened their papers, witnesses froze mid-sentence, and jurors sat rigid, trying to process what they were witnessing. This was no ordinary pause. It was a collective realization that something extraordinary had happened in their midst. The judge motioned to the bailiff. "Please approach the child and ensure he is safe," she instructed. The bailiff nodded, moving carefully toward the boy, whose small frame remained on the floor, cross-legged, eyes locked on the dog. Every inch of him radiated cautious focus. He was no longer trembling, but he wasn't smiling either. His fingers rested lightly on the dog's fur, a touch tentative yet confident enough to indicate recognition and trust. "Ma'am," the judge asked softly, turning to the boy's aunt, "can you explain why he is here today?" The woman swallowed, her throat tight. "Your Honor, it's complicated. He's my nephew. Several months ago, police rescued him from a violent home situation. He hasn't spoken much since the incident. He's been very quiet, scared of crowds, and sensitive to new people. He hasn't even been able to sleep well at night." Her voice trembled slightly as she glanced at the child, who remained transfixed by the dog. "But I think he recognizes that dog. I think he remembers that night." The judge nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. She looked at the handler kneeling beside the K-9. "Officer, is this true?" The man's jaw tightened. "Yes, Your Honor. Months ago, we responded to a domestic call at night. The apartment was chaotic, screaming, shouting, broken furniture. We found this child hiding in a closet. My K-9 partner stayed with him, guarding him until paramedics arrived. The dog refused to leave his side." He glanced down at the German Shepherd, whose gaze remained fixed on the boy. "He remembers. He knows him." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged startled glances. Lawyers leaned back in their chairs, uncertain whether to speak or stay silent. The clerk paused, hands hovering above the keyboard. Everyone understood, though none could fully articulate it, that this was more than a legal matter. This was an emotional moment, a memory unfolding in real time, bridging past trauma and present safety. The judge exhaled slowly, her eyes never leaving the child and the dog. "It seems," she said carefully, "that what we are witnessing is not disruption, but recognition. This child is experiencing an emotional response to a situation of safety he endured before. I am going to allow this to continue under supervision until he is ready to move on." The courtroom shifted again, almost imperceptibly. Adults who had arrived expecting an ordinary day in court now found themselves spectators to a moment that transcended law. No one argued. The judge's command was clear: witness, observe, and protect the child's emotional needs. The handler relaxed slightly but kept a watchful eye on both the dog and the child. The German Shepherd, for his part, remained seated but had lowered his chest, signaling trust and attention. The bond between them was palpable, though invisible to most. Every movement, every breath of the dog seemed attuned to the child. Every heartbeat echoed with recognition, empathy, and quiet reassurance. The aunt whispered softly, barely audible to anyone except the child. "It's okay, it's okay." She felt tears welling in her eyes. This was the first time she had seen him relax even a fraction since the incident months ago. His small fingers traced the dog's fur gently, brushing past the vest that labeled him as a mere tool of law enforcement. For the child, the vest meant nothing. The dog meant everything. The judge watched, a sense of gravity settling in her chest. She understood now that this moment demanded careful attention. The child's trauma could not be dismissed. It could not be hurried. And the dog, trained for obedience, law, and protection, was performing a task far more vital than following commands. He was providing emotional support, bridging the gap between fear and safety. After a few minutes, the child shifted slightly, leaning closer to the dog. The handler allowed the leash to slacken further, trusting the dog's instincts. The German Shepherd lowered his head slowly, permitting the child to place both hands gently on his snout. The child's eyes softened, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It was a small smile, hesitant, fragile, but it was genuine. The courtroom, meanwhile, remained silent. Jurors leaned forward slightly, witnessing the rare combination of instinct and memory, trauma and healing. Lawyers had set aside their cases, the weight of evidence and testimony temporarily forgotten. Even the bailiff, trained for control and authority, remained still, understanding instinctively that this was not a situation for intervention. Finally, the judge spoke again. "This courtroom will respect the needs of this child. All future proceedings in this trial will take into account the trauma he has experienced and the unique circumstances we have witnessed today." Her words were firm, carrying both authority and compassion. She met the gaze of the child briefly, then the dog. Justice is not just about law. It is about protection, understanding, and empathy. The handler nodded subtly, feeling the full weight of those words. The dog remained seated but exhaled in a slow, controlled breath, signaling that he understood and that the child was safe in his presence. It was as though the animal itself had been recognized not only as a protector, but as an agent of healing. The aunt gathered the child in her arms, careful not to disturb his bond with the dog. "Do you want to say goodbye for now?" she whispered. The boy shook his head slightly, refusing to let go completely. His fingers brushed against the dog's fur one last time. The German Shepherd remained still, allowing the contact, his posture calm but alert. Outside the immediate circle of attention, adults in the courtroom felt a profound shift. They had come expecting an ordinary legal proceeding. Instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary, a living, breathing example of compassion, memory, and trust. It was a reminder that law and humanity could intersect in unexpected ways, and that moments of care could be as powerful as any verdict or sentence. The judge finally called the recess formally. "All personnel may step back, but no one is to disturb this interaction." Her gavel struck softly, a mere punctuation mark to a moment that had already reshaped the atmosphere of the courtroom. The child, the aunt, the dog, and the handler remained in the center of attention, creating a stillness that seemed to suspend time itself. And in that quiet, the boy rested his head slightly against the dog's side, breathing in the faint, familiar scent. The dog rested his chin near the child's knee, his eyes scanning the room but always returning to the boy. It was a mutual recognition, a bond forged not in words but in memory and instinct, a silent promise that, for now, he was safe. The judge watched, understanding that the courtroom would never be the same. Rules could guide procedure, laws could dictate outcomes, but moments like this transcended the boundaries of law. They reminded everyone present that justice, at its core, was about protection, care, and acknowledgement of the most vulnerable. For the first time that day, the child smiled fully, small and tentative, yet genuine. The dog exhaled, calm and steady, his mission complete in a way that no words could capture. And the courtroom collectively realized they were witnessing something rare. A bridge between trauma and trust, between fear and safety, between law and humanity. Months before the courtroom encounter, the night had been a blur of chaos, fear, and urgency. The call had come in just after midnight, a frantic 911 report of screaming and possible violence in a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town. Officers arrived quickly, lights flashing, sirens piercing the still night. The building was older, its paint peeling, stairs creaking under the weight of their boots. Every step inside the apartment was met with uncertainty. Every sound, a crash, a shout, a sob, set nerves on edge. The K-9 unit had been deployed immediately. The German Shepherd, disciplined and alert, led the way, trained to detect threats, locate victims, and provide protection in situations no human could safely navigate alone. His handler followed closely, eyes scanning the dimly lit rooms, ears straining for any sound of danger. Inside, the apartment was a mess. Furniture was overturned, a lamp lay shattered on the floor, and walls were scuffed with signs of struggle. The air smelled faintly of bleach, smoke, and fear. But the strongest scent, the one that dominated everything, was that of a frightened child. Small, tense, and hidden, he had curled himself in the corner of a closet, trembling silently. The dog froze as he detected the child. Years of training told him to proceed cautiously, to assess threats, to maintain a professional distance until commanded otherwise. But instinct overrode training. He knew immediately, this child was not a threat. He was vulnerable. He needed protection. The handler noticed the pause. "Easy, partner," he whispered, expecting the dog to continue searching. The dog did not move. His eyes stayed locked on the closet door, ears pricked, body rigid yet calm. The handler moved closer, signaling with his hand. But the dog did not budge. Not until the handler knelt beside him and made eye contact did he allow a small step forward toward the child, not away. The closet door creaked slightly as the handler opened it. The boy flinched, curling tighter into himself. His eyes were wide with terror, wet with unshed tears. But the dog did not bark. He did not snap. He simply sat down in front of the child, blocking the entrance with his body. The child could not move without seeing the dog, and in that instant the dog became a wall of safety. Hours, or it felt like hours, passed. The boy did not speak. He did not cry. He simply remained still, his small body pressed to the floor, eyes darting between the dog and the open doorway. The German Shepherd stayed motionless, vigilant, patient, unwavering. He would not leave. He could not leave. The handler remained nearby, ready to intervene if needed, but the bond forming between child and dog was immediate, undeniable. Finally, paramedics arrived. They gently coaxed the boy from his hiding place, but he resisted. He clung to the dog's fur, trembling, and whispered nothing but a sound that meant everything: relief. The dog's head lowered, chest rising and falling slowly, eyes softening. He had fulfilled his duty, not through commands, not through obedience, but through instinct and loyalty. The incident left its mark. The child, though rescued, carried trauma with him like a shadow. He spoke little, slept fitfully, and flinched at loud noises. Therapy and care helped, but the memory of that night, chaotic, terrifying, yet saved by the K-9, stayed with him. For the dog, however, the memory was clear and vivid. Animals remember differently than humans. They remember through scent, tone, emotion. The fear, the trembling, the fragility of the child, it was etched into the dog's being. He never forgot. Months later in the courtroom, the memory resurfaced, not as a thought but as instinct. When the boy's small hand reached out, the dog recognized the scent immediately. The air carried faint traces of the apartment, of the fear and relief intertwined that night. His body responded, lowering and softening, signaling to the boy that he was still safe. No commands were needed. No training manual could teach this. This was memory, loyalty, and trust fused into action. The judge, observing from the bench, was unaware of the full story, but the court could feel it. The child's trust in the dog's recognition, and the shared silence conveyed more than words ever could. Everyone in the room sensed that the ordinary rules of courtroom behavior were inadequate to describe what was happening. The aunt watched the boy, silently recalling the night the police had arrived. She remembered the relief she had felt, seeing him safe, alive, with the K9 by his side. She had never imagined that months later, in a room of strangers and authority figures, her nephew would react with the same trust and recognition. Tears pricked her eyes as she whispered encouragement, careful not to startle him. The K9 handler, too, felt the weight of the moment. He had trained countless dogs, led dozens of rescue operations, and faced countless dangerous situations, but this was different. The dog beside him was not just performing a task, he was participating in an unspoken act of healing. For the first time in months, the handler saw the boy relax. Every inch of tension seemed to melt, just slightly, as the child acknowledged the dog as both familiar and safe. For the child, the dog represented more than just protection. He represented consistency, reliability, and comfort in a world that had shown him chaos and unpredictability. And for the dog, the child was a symbol of duty fulfilled, of a life saved, and of trust honored. The courtroom remained quiet, everyone watching as the boy slowly, tentatively, placed his hand on the dog's head. The German Shepherd did not flinch. He leaned slightly into the touch, a small but deliberate gesture of acceptance. The connection was instantaneous, emotional, and entirely unspoken. No one in the room had ever witnessed anything like it. The lawyers, the officers, the jurors, all trained to focus on evidence and procedure, were captivated by a moment that transcended rules. It was a living demonstration of loyalty, memory, and emotional intelligence. And the judge, sitting high above them all, knew instinctively that this was a pivotal moment, not for the trial itself, but for the lives intertwined within it. The child's breathing evened out, the faintest smile appearing on his lips. It was small, fragile, tentative, but it was genuine. The German Shepherd shifted slightly, placing his chin near the boy's knee, maintaining vigilance while signaling comfort. For a brief moment, trauma, fear, and chaos were replaced with calm, trust, and safety. It was a silent communication that required no words, no laws, no formalities. Just recognition, understanding, and compassion, the kind that transcends species and circumstances alike. The judge reflected on it quietly, understanding that moments like this could not be scheduled, legislated, or commanded. They were rare, precious, and powerful. Justice, she realized, was not always about rules, evidence, or verdicts. It was also about moments of care, moments of protection, and moments of humanity. And in that shared silence between the child and the dog, the courtroom held its breath, witnessing something profound. A bridge between past trauma and present safety, between fear and trust, between human fragility and animal loyalty. For the first time since the rescue, the child allowed himself to feel entirely safe. The dog, the K9 who had never forgotten, allowed himself to respond in kind. And the adults in the courtroom realized that what they had come to see as a procedural, impersonal system of law had, in that moment, become a vessel for healing. The courtroom had transformed. What had begun as a routine legal proceeding had shifted into something almost sacred. Every adult present, trained to maintain composure and observe authority, found themselves suspended in silence, captivated by the quiet connection unfolding at the back of the room. The 3-year-old boy sat cross-legged on the floor, his small hands lightly resting on the German Shepherd's fur. The dog remained calm and poised, yet every movement of his body radiated attentiveness, patience, and protection. The judge observed closely from the bench. She had never presided over a moment like this. Years of experience had taught her to weigh evidence, assess credibility, and maintain courtroom order, but nothing in any legal manual could prepare her for a scenario where a child and a K-9 officer conveyed more truth than words ever could. The courtroom was filled with observers who recognized instinctively that this was not disruption. This was healing. The boy's breathing, which had been shallow and nervous at the start of the proceedings, began to deepen. His tiny fingers traced the dog's fur with growing confidence, moving over the coarse hairs on his back and the soft curve of his ears. The German Shepherd, trained for years to suppress emotion in public, allowed the contact, lowering his chest to bring himself closer to the child's level. The dog's tail remained still, a sign of disciplined control, yet his body language broadcasted reassurance. I am here. You are safe. The handler kneeling nearby watched silently. His leash rested loosely in his hand. He knew the dog's instincts would guide this encounter without interference. Months ago, during the nighttime rescue, he had witnessed the dog stay with the child, guarding him, comforting him in ways no human could replicate. Now the memory and the present converged. The K-9 was repeating history, not mechanically but with full emotional awareness, responding to the boy's recognition and trust. The aunt, crouched just behind her nephew, whispered softly, "It's okay. He's your friend. You're safe now." She felt tears pricking her eyes. She had seen her nephew trembling during the rescue, seen him withdraw into himself afterward, his small body burdened with fear and trauma. She had prayed for moments like this, moments of safety, of recognition, of comfort. And now, months later, it had arrived in a courtroom where procedure and law usually dictated behavior. The judge, understanding the gravity of the moment, allowed it to continue without interruption. She had already issued the recess order, but now, observing the child and the dog, she realized that even a short pause might be insufficient. Justice, in its deepest form, was about more than rulings. It was about understanding, protecting, and sometimes giving space for healing. Minutes passed. The boy's initial hesitation faded as he gently leaned forward, resting his head lightly on the dog's side. The German Shepherd remained still but alert, exuding a calm vigilance. No sudden movements occurred, no growls or barks. The room held its breath. Adults, trained to intervene or react, understood intuitively that this was not a situation to control. It was a moment to honor. The child's eyes flickered briefly toward his aunt. She smiled reassuringly, nodding for him to continue. Slowly, he stretched his hands over the dog's head, his fingertips brushing against the soft fur near the dog's ears. The dog lowered his chin slightly, resting it near the child's shoulder, allowing full contact. This simple gesture carried profound meaning. I remember you. I am here for you. The courtroom seemed to sense the magnitude of the interaction. Jurors leaned forward, forgetting the case entirely, captivated by a display of loyalty and trust that transcended language. Lawyers remained seated, papers momentarily abandoned, witnesses hushed, and even the bailiffs allowed the quiet to persist. In that room, human and animal communicated truths that no statute, argument, or testimony could fully convey. The handler, careful not to interrupt, murmured quietly, "You're safe. You're okay." His voice was gentle, meant only for the child and dog. The words seemed to flow into the room's collective consciousness, carrying reassurance and calm. The dog's ears twitched slightly at the sound, acknowledging the tone. The boy's head lifted just a fraction, a subtle smile forming on his lips. It was tentative but genuine, a small, brave acknowledgement that safety had returned, even if only temporarily, in the midst of the unfamiliar and intimidating courtroom. The judge reflected on the moment. Here was a 3-year-old child, previously silent, withdrawn, and terrified, now sitting in calm, deliberate interaction with a trained officer who had been a presence in his life months before. She realized that the courtroom, usually a theater of authority and procedure, had been transformed into a space for trust, empathy, and care. Protocols, rules, and decorum mattered less than this raw, unspoken communication. The aunt, still crouching nearby, reached out slowly, brushing her fingers along her nephew's back. "See," she whispered, "You're okay. He's your friend. You're safe now." The boy nodded, eyes soft, no longer scanning for danger. The dog exhaled slowly, a deep, controlled breath, a subtle release of tension accumulated over months. The animal's vigilance remained, but it was tempered with reassurance. The judge's gaze softened. She had allowed recess with procedural intent, but now she understood that this was not merely a pause. It was an emotional reset. Trauma, fear, and memory were being addressed in real time, right before her eyes. The child was safe, not because of legal authority, but because of instinct and connection, a demonstration that some forms of justice transcended law. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The child finally let both hands rest fully on the dog's shoulders. The dog leaned slightly forward, chin near the boy's knees, eyes scanning the room but always returning to the child. A perfect balance of vigilance and care. The courtroom held its collective breath, fully present, observing something extraordinary, the transformative power of empathy, instinct, and trust. The child's smile broadened subtly, more confident now, though still cautious. The dog remained poised, never breaking professional composure yet clearly responsive. The judge allowed herself a brief sigh, recognizing that the courtroom's role in this moment was minimal. Observers could witness, but intervention was unnecessary. Sometimes, justice required observation, patience, and respect for emotional bonds as much as adherence to law. Finally, the judge spoke softly, her words carrying across the quiet room. "This courtroom will honor this moment. We are not only witnesses to the law but to compassion, care, and understanding. Let this interaction proceed under supervision, and let no one disrupt it." The handler released a fraction of tension in his hand, allowing the leash to slacken. The dog responded with subtle confidence, remaining seated but fully attentive. The boy rested his small head against the dog's side, breathing steady, fingers tracing fur with deliberate care. He had found safety again, and the German Shepherd had reaffirmed his role as protector, not just as a trained officer, but as a loyal, instinctive companion. The ant whispered once more, "See, he remembers, he's here for you." The boy nodded, finally closing his eyes for the briefest moment. In that room of law, order, and protocol, the child experienced calm, trust, and recognition for the first time in months. The courtroom had become a space for quiet healing, a pause in the ordinary sequence of justice to honor the extraordinary connection between human and animal. The judge remained seated, observing quietly. She understood that what had occurred in this courtroom could not be fully captured in transcripts, legal reports, or testimony. It was a lesson in empathy, memory, and trust that transcended statute and procedure. The child and the dog, together in that quiet space, demonstrated that sometimes protection and understanding could be far more powerful than any law alone. As the boy finally relaxed against the dog, the faintest hint of a smile tugged at his lips. The German Shepherd, poised and alert yet soft in his posture, exhaled slowly. The room, too, seemed to release its collective tension. What had begun as fear, silence, and uncertainty had transformed into recognition, calm, and reassurance, a silent reunion between a child and the protector who had never forgotten him. And in that quiet, profound moment, the courtroom witnessed something extraordinary: the healing power of connection, the instinctual wisdom of an animal, and the human capacity to pause, observe, and honor a bond that transcended the ordinary rules of law. The courtroom, once tense with the hum of routine and authority, now felt like a different place entirely. The pause had stretched longer than anyone expected. The 3-year-old child, sitting cross-legged beside the German Shepherd, had settled into a calmness that none of the adults in the room had anticipated. His fingers rested lightly on the dog's fur, tracing gentle patterns, while the dog remained alert yet relaxed, a perfect balance of vigilance and reassurance. The judge tapped her gavel lightly, signaling that proceedings could cautiously resume. Her voice was softer than usual, imbued with a calm authority that reflected the weight of what had just occurred. "Let us continue," she said, "but let it be understood that the child's safety and emotional state are paramount. Any disturbance will be addressed immediately." The courtroom adjusted quickly. Lawyers returned to their tables, papers shuffled, pens scratched on notepads. Jurors straightened, focusing on the proceedings with renewed attention. Yet the atmosphere had shifted. No longer was this just a trial. It had become a space where the human heart and instinctual understanding of an animal had reminded everyone present of the fragile, profound intersections between law, trauma, and care. The prosecutor rose first. Her normally clipped, confident tone was softer, gentler. "Your Honor," she said, "we will proceed carefully, recognizing the unique circumstances present." She glanced briefly at the child, then at the K9 before continuing. "The testimony we present today will be clear, factual, and sensitive to the child's experience." The defense attorney nodded, mirroring the sentiment. "We are prepared to proceed with caution," he said. "Our goal is not to traumatize, but to ensure justice is served fairly." The first witness returned to the stand, a police officer who had responded to the original incident months prior. He adjusted his uniform, cleared his throat, and began recounting the events of that night. But even as he spoke, the courtroom felt different. The words were no longer abstract reports of procedures and findings. They carried context, emotion, and the unspoken weight of memory. Adults in the room listened intently, but their attention often wandered to the child and the dog, whose bond now illuminated the reality of the night in ways no testimony ever could. The child's breathing remained steady. His small hands continued to lightly touch the dog's fur, and occasionally his eyes would meet the dog, silently communicating trust, recognition, and reassurance. The German Shepherd responded in kind, never shifting position unnecessarily, maintaining the calm energy that had become a lifeline for the boy. The judge observed closely, understanding that this interaction was doing more than offering comfort. It was reshaping the courtroom itself. Witnesses spoke differently when they knew a child's trauma had tangible support. Jurors absorbed facts with a deeper understanding, empathizing not just with the abstract victim, but with the living child before them. Lawyers adjusted their tone, their packing, their emphasis, knowing that words carried more weight than in a typical trial. As testimony continued, the prosecutor introduced reports from Child Protective Services. The documents, filled with facts, statistics, and observations, suddenly seemed alive in the room. When the child flinched slightly at a particularly vivid description, the German Shepherd leaned gently forward, resting his head closer to the boy's lap. The boy instinctively leaned into the dog, and the courtroom witnessed the subtle but profound influence the animal had over the child's emotional state. The judge paused the proceedings once more, this time with deliberate intent. She called the attorneys forward for a brief discussion at the bench. "We must proceed with sensitivity," she said quietly. "The child's trauma is evident, and the K9's presence is clearly integral to his sense of safety. Let us adjust our approach accordingly." The lawyers nodded. The courtroom returned to its seats, and the trial resumed with a noticeable shift in tone. Witnesses spoke slowly and deliberately, avoiding technical jargon and emphasizing clarity. Jurors leaned forward, absorbing the facts but now filtered through an emotional lens. The child remained calm beside the dog, the presence of the K9 giving him reassurance while the courtroom adapted around him. During a break in testimony, the handler allowed the dog to stretch slightly, walking a small circle around the boy before resuming his seated position. The boy's hands followed the motion, maintaining contact with the dog. It was a silent choreography, each aware of the other's needs and boundaries. The judge, observing this, realized that justice sometimes required more than rules and procedure. It required humanity, observation, and adaptation. The aunt whispered to her nephew, her voice barely audible, "See, you're safe, you're okay, you're doing so well." The child nodded, a small but confident gesture. For the first time in months, he felt not just protected but empowered. The dog's presence had given him a safe space in which he could process, respond, and engage with the world around him. As the trial progressed, the child began to interact more openly, occasionally looking at the lawyers, nodding in response to soft questions, and even letting small sounds escape him. A giggle when the dog shifted slightly, a soft sigh of contentment when the dog rested his chin near the boy's knees. Each moment of engagement was a triumph, demonstrating that trauma could be mitigated through patience, care, and presence. The courtroom began to reflect on the trial in a new light. Adults realized that the case, while legally important, also carried human consequences far beyond evidence and verdicts. The child's healing had become central, and the presence of the K-9 had transformed a potentially frightening and alien environment into one of trust and safety. The judge allowed the child and dog to remain in the courtroom for a particularly emotional witness testimony. The witness, a social worker involved in the child's care, described the psychological impact of domestic trauma on toddlers. The child remained calm, sitting closely to the dog, occasionally glancing up with wide, trusting eyes. The dog's steady presence allowed the boy to absorb the testimony without fear. Adults in the room witnessed the profound effect of a companion who provided safety and reassurance in real time. Finally, after hours of carefully guided testimony, the courtroom reached a quiet moment. The judge leaned forward, addressing everyone. "This trial has taken an unexpected path," she said. "But let it be noted that the safety and emotional well-being of all present, especially the child, remain paramount. Let us proceed with the utmost care and consideration." The trial continued, but the tone had irrevocably changed. Where once procedure and law had dominated, now empathy, observation, and patience guided the process. The child remained calm, the dog ever vigilant, and adults learned a valuable lesson: that healing, trust, and understanding could shape outcomes in ways no legal text could anticipate. In the quiet moments, the judge observed the boy resting his head against the German Shepherd. It was a picture of security and connection, a reminder that justice at its heart was not only about punishment or procedure, but also about protection, understanding, and humanity. The courtroom, transformed by this small, profound bond, continued with renewed purpose, carrying with it the weight of a lesson no one would forget. And as the day progressed, the 3-year-old boy, once trembling and silent, remained steady beside the dog who had never forgotten, showing everyone in the room that courage, trust, and healing could coexist even in the most formal and intimidating of places. The courtroom had settled into a rhythm that was entirely new. What began as an ordinary day of legal proceedings had transformed into a testament of human and animal connection. The child, now visibly calmer, sat beside the German Shepherd with a quiet confidence that had not been present earlier. His small fingers traced the dog's fur, moving in gentle, deliberate strokes. The dog, alert yet relaxed, exuded a steady reassurance, silently communicating, "You are safe. I am here." The judge called the final witness, a police detective who had investigated the case leading up to the trial. The detective's voice was steady, professional, but even he was aware of the unique atmosphere. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of cold procedure. It had become a space of understanding, empathy, and careful observation. Each word spoken, each piece of evidence presented, carried a different weight. Facts were now filtered through a lens of human vulnerability and trust. As the detective recounted the events, referencing reports and photographs, the child remained calm. The K-9's presence allowed him to sit through testimony without fear, even when sensitive details were mentioned. The dog leaned slightly toward the boy, resting his chin near his lap, maintaining a posture that balanced vigilance and comfort. It was a living demonstration of protection and emotional intelligence that no lecture or legal instruction could replicate. The jury watched attentively, absorbing not only the evidence but also the subtle, powerful bond between child and animal. For the first time, it seemed that the human elements of trust, care, and recognition were as integral to the proceedings as the facts themselves. The presence of the K-9 had subtly altered the entire dynamic of the courtroom, allowing witnesses, attorneys, and jurors to engage with the trial on a deeper, more compassionate level. The prosecution rested and the defense began to present their case. Witnesses described the home environment, the child's interactions prior to rescue, and the long-term psychological impacts of trauma. Again, the K-9's presence provided a steadying influence. Each time the child showed signs of discomfort, a slight flinch, a tight grip on his aunt's hand, the dog responded with subtle cues, a soft shift of weight, a lowering of the chest, a gentle exhale. The child relaxed, and the courtroom felt the weight of the unseen but undeniable support. At one point, the defense attorney paused, observing the interaction. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "it's evident that the child's trauma has been significant. The K-9's presence has allowed him to remain engaged and calm. This cannot be overstated in terms of its impact on his ability to participate safely in these proceedings." The judge nodded solemnly. "Noted," she replied. "It is clear that the emotional and psychological safety of this child is paramount. The court will continue to recognize the K-9's role in ensuring that safety." As the final witnesses were heard, the courtroom felt a collective sense of closure. The child, still seated beside the dog, allowed himself a small but genuine smile. He looked up briefly at his aunt, who whispered softly, "You did so well, see. You're safe and you're being brave." The boy's eyes met the dog's once more. The K-9 leaned slightly closer as if acknowledging the boy's courage, silently communicating, "I am proud of you. You are safe with me." The judge prepared to deliver her closing instructions to the jury. Her tone was measured, solemn, yet carried a warmth that reflected the extraordinary events of the day. "Members of the jury," she began, "you have heard testimony, reviewed evidence, and observed the interactions of all parties involved. It is important to remember that the law seeks justice, but justice is more than evidence and procedure. It is also about understanding, protection, and humanity." She paused, glancing at the child and the K-9. "We have witnessed something extraordinary today. A child, through fear and trauma, has found safety in the presence of an animal trained to protect, yet capable of empathy. That bond has allowed him to participate in these proceedings, and it reminds us all that compassion and care are integral to justice." The jury absorbed her words, the weight of the day's events settling in. The trial, once a purely legal exercise, had become a testament to the power of trust, recognition, and emotional intelligence. They would carry this lesson with them long after the verdict was delivered. When deliberations concluded hours later, the jury returned with a verdict that reflected both the evidence and the broader context they had witnessed. The defendant was found guilty on key charges, but the room was filled with a quiet, respectful understanding. Justice had been served, but it had been tempered with humanity. As the judge prepared to adjourn, she turned to the child and the K-9. "Young man, you have been incredibly brave today," she said gently. "You have faced difficult moments and shown courage beyond your years. Your friend here has clearly helped you, and I want you to know that your bravery has been seen and honored." The boy's eyes shone with pride and relief. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the dog's head. The German Shepherd remained calm, leaning slightly into the boy's touch. The handler knelt beside them, voice low and comforting. "You did it. You stayed safe. You were brave." The aunt embraced her nephew gently, whispering reassurances and words of love. The child's small arms wrapped around the dog, and for a moment the courtroom witnessed a scene that transcended the ordinary boundaries of law. This was not merely a legal victory. It was a triumph of trust, recognition, and healing. The judge allowed a moment of quiet before addressing the courtroom one final time. "Let today be remembered not just for the verdict, but for the reminder that protection, care, and empathy are vital parts of justice. This child, through his courage and the loyalty of his K-9 companion, has taught us all a lesson that extends beyond law books, that humanity, in its purest form, can guide even the most formal proceedings." The courtroom slowly emptied, but the energy lingered. Lawyers, jurors, officers, and spectators alike carried with them the memory of a 3-year-old boy and a German shepherd who had bridged the gap between trauma and safety. They had witnessed something rare, a living testament to courage, empathy, and trust. Outside, sunlight streamed across the courthouse steps. The boy, now cradled gently by his aunt, looked back once more at the K9 who sat patiently beside his handler. The dog's gaze met the child's, a silent promise that transcended words. "I will never forget you. You are safe with me." The handler gave the dog a soft pat, then glanced at the aunt and the child. "He'll always remember this, and so will we," he said quietly. The boy nodded slightly, small fingers brushing the dog's fur one last time before standing. As they walked out together, the courthouse behind them seemed transformed. Inside, those who had witnessed the day's events would carry the memory forever. The trial had been more than legal proceedings. It had been a story of healing, courage, and the extraordinary bond between a child and a loyal companion who had never forgotten him. For the child, the dog had been a lifeline, a bridge from fear to safety, from trauma to trust. For the courtroom, it had been a lesson that would resonate far beyond the walls, that true justice is not only measured in law, but also in care, empathy, and recognition of the most vulnerable among us. And for the German shepherd, trained for protection and obedience, the day had been another chapter in a life dedicated to service. But this chapter was different, because here, instinct and memory had combined with love, teaching humans a lesson they could never have learned from statutes alone. As the courthouse doors closed behind them, the boy squeezed his aunt's hand, casting a final glance toward the K9. The dog's ears twitched in acknowledgement, a silent promise echoing between them. The bond had been formed in crisis, strengthened by recognition, and now solidified in trust. The story of that day, the judge who paused, the courtroom that witnessed, and the child who found safety, would be remembered not for its legal drama alone, but for its human truth. That courage can come in the smallest forms, and that loyalty, love, and empathy often leave the deepest mark. And so, the boy walked forward, hand in hand with his aunt, carrying with him the memory of a guardian who had never let him down, while the German shepherd remained by his handler's side, vigilant yet calm, ready to continue his life of service, but always remembering the little boy who had once needed him most.